get out and vote. It's all about democracy, y'all. Your vote gets counted with the rest of the votes in the country, and they get sent off to the Electoral College. What's that? The Electoral College are a bunch of officials who do the voting for us. So in case we elect the wrong person, they can fix their shiz.
Whoa, hold up. Who the hell are these people?
Well, no one knows for sure, but whoever they is, they the folks who actually do the real voting after we do our pretend vote. Yeah!
Power to the people.
Hold the on!
You're telling me our votes don't matter?
Our votes are like suggestions.
So this November we should...
Yeah! Dunk the vote!
Greetings, my dear brothers and sisters. I am Counselor West, an elected official of the Zion High Council and tenured professor here at Matrix University. Now that we've gotten the obvious stuff out of the way, I want to take a moment to talk to all people who are tired of being told they must settle for the lesser of two evils during presidential elections. I want to talk to the people who have been staying home on election day because they want their vote to truly mean something, which means I have to talk to you about the Electoral College and third-party candidates. You see, the Electoral College is not a direct reflection of the people's will. It's a system designed to disproportionately favor certain states, giving them a louder voice than others. And it does so through several key mechanisms that we're going to discuss. Previously, we addressed the manner in which the Electoral College maintains a system of controlled opposition during the Illusion of Choice Red versus Blue video here on this channel. I highly recommend you go back and give it a watch because it explains in detail the illusion that red versus blue politics creates. But today, I want to show you how to leverage this current voting system to become a platform for the issues that matter. And by the end of this video, you should understand why voting for a third-party candidate is a much more effective strategy than simply not voting at all. The magic number to win the presidency is 270 electoral votes. But here's the kicker. In a system dominated by two major parties, they've created a political map where swing states, those battleground states where the fight is close, are prioritized over the majority of the country. Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, they get all the attention. What about the rest of America? The Electoral College reduces most states to irrelevance in presidential elections. The Democrats and Republicans focus on those key states, leaving the people in so-called safe states out in the cold, their votes nearly forgotten. In almost every state, the winner of the popular vote takes all of that state's electoral votes. If you're running as a third-party candidate, and let's say you win 20, 25, or even 30% of the vote, doesn't matter, you still get nothing. In 1992, independent candidate Ross Perot received 18.9% of the popular vote across the country, but did not gain a single electoral college vote in any one state. A third-party candidate also has to fight tooth and nail for ballot visibility in every state, and not just in those few strategic battleground locations. But we'll come back to that. In theory, an independent or third-party candidate could win the presidency. However, since the Electoral College is winner-take-all within each state, and a majority of Electoral College votes wins the presidency, a three-way race among equals would leave no candidate with sufficient electors to become president, and the race would be thrown to the House of Representatives, with each state delegation getting one vote, which means that it wouldn't be enough to just get 1/3 of the popular vote, especially if the independent candidate were very popular in some region, taking votes away from one of the major candidates there. For example, if the independent takes more Republican votes in one state, then the Democrat would take that state more easily, or vice versa. If the independent takes away from both more or less equally, then the winner take all nature of the election means that it's as if the other two parties required fewer votes to come out on top. Only if the independent was substantially more popular than either of the other two candidates, without the benefit of the fundraising and organizing capacity of those parties, could they win. And then they would still be isolated, having no fellow party members in Congress. Because of the Electoral College, it isn't enough for a candidate to have the most votes or even the most electoral votes. You have to win 50% plus one of the Electoral College vote. If no candidate meets that threshold, then Congress chooses the president. Given that Congress will always be under the control of one of the two major parties, then if an election has to be decided by Congress, they will always choose their own party's candidate, leaving a close race independent candidate locked out yet again. So to win the presidency, a third party candidate would have to win more electoral college votes than all other candidates combined. And that's not realistic. A landslide victory of that magnitude is a virtually impossible feat, because voters realize that very few will vote on someone they know can't win. By the end of the 20th century, electoral colleges had been abandoned by all other democracies around the world in favor of direct elections for an executive president. We must tell the entire truth about the foundations of the Electoral College as it was originally designed, in order to grapple with the depths of its historical roots. When the Constitution was being written, the framers faced a deep and divisive issue: slavery. There were 13 original colonies, and they were split into two emerging factions: slave states found mostly in the South, and non-slave states primarily in the North. The southern states relied on the forced labor of the enslaved to maintain their agricultural economies, particularly in the production of cash crops like tobacco, rice, and later, cotton. The northern states, while not free of slavery, racial prejudice, or exploitation, were becoming more industrialized and less reliant on chattel slavery. Now, it is important to understand this historical detail. When the Electoral College was created, it was not just a mechanism to choose a president. It was also a compromise between those who wanted a direct popular vote and those who wanted Congress to elect the president. But undergirding this was the raw fact that the southern states wanted to preserve their political power in a new nation that was inching toward a moral reckoning with slavery. The Electoral College was tied directly to the infamous 3/5 Compromise. It's impossible to talk about the Electoral College's history without mentioning this grotesque policy. Southern slaveholders wanted their slaves to be counted as part of their population when determining representation in Congress and in the Electoral College. The Northern delegates, of course, objected and called out the hypocrisy. How can you count people as part of your population, who you also deny both their humanity and their freedom? Thus, the brutal compromise was made. Enslaved people would be counted as 3/5 of a person. Their existence would be partially recognized, not as full human beings, but as fractions to increase the political clout of the southern states in both Congress and the Electoral College. This compromise gave the South disproportionate power for decades, ensuring that slave-holding interests would dominate the early American presidency. Consider the fact that 5 of the first 7 U.S. presidents were Southern slaveholders, including Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, 2 of the men most involved in shaping the Constitution and the Electoral College. Jefferson, for instance, benefited enormously from the 3/5 Compromise when he won the presidency in 1800s. His victory came in part because the South had more electoral votes than it would have if only free persons had been counted. Slavery was propping up political power from the very beginning, and for this reason alone, the Electoral College should be replaced. The Whig Party, founded in the 1830s, was a coalition that came together to oppose the policies of Andrew Jackson and the Democratic Party. The Whigs were primarily a party of economic modernization, advocating for a strong federal government, infrastructure development, and a national banking system. But they were also a deeply divided party when it came to the question of slavery. The Whigs tried to maintain a delicate balance between their northern and southern factions. In the North, many Whigs were opposed to the expansion of slavery, while in the South, many were either supportive of slavery or willing to compromise to maintain national unity. But as the nation moved closer to the Civil War, the party could no longer hold itself together. Now, we must remember that the Whigs were the last third-party movement to win the presidency. In 1840, William Henry Harrison, running as a Whig, won the presidency, and again in 1848, Zachary Taylor was also elected. But after Taylor's presidency, and with the nation on the brink of war over slavery, the Whig Party completely fell apart. The passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, which allowed new territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, was the final nail in the coffin for the Whigs. The party fractured. with many Northern Whigs joining the newly formed Republican Party, which was explicitly opposed to the expansion of slavery. By 1856, they had dissolved as a major party, and the two-party system, dominated by the Republicans and Democrats, has been in control ever since. Again, I want you to remember that the last time a third-party candidate won a presidential election, the election took place before the Civil War, over 150 years ago. This is an important detail because it provides an example, a roadmap, and historical context for how revolutionary changes fermented in spite of injustice. Fast forward to the lead up to the Civil War. The South, seeing the growing abolitionist movement in the North, feared the loss of their political power. The electoral system had always been a shield, a tool they used to defend slavery. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln won the presidency without carrying a single Southern state, and the slave-holding South, seeing the writing on the wall, seceded from the Union, igniting the Civil War. The institution that had given them so much leverage, the Electoral College, was suddenly insufficient to protect slavery in a nation that was increasingly divided. And even though the Whig Party itself did not survive, the message and pressure from those third-party Northern Whigs to end slavery continued beyond the party itself. After the North's victory in the Civil War, America entered the period known as Reconstruction. From 1865 to 1877, the country began integrating formerly enslaved Black Americans into society, and this led to new amendments to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship and equal protection under the law to all persons, and crucially, eliminated the 3/5 compromise, ensuring that Black Americans would be fully counted in determining representation. The 15th Amendment granted Black men the right to vote. The Electoral College remained in place, now counting Black Americans as a whole person. But many Southern states found new ways to disenfranchise Black voters through Jim Crow laws, poll taxes, and literacy tests. After the Civil War, America entered a new phase in political life that made it nearly impossible for third-party candidates to win the presidency. The Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th, ushered in a period of transformation, but they also solidified the federal government's power and the bipartisan control of that power. The major parties entrenched themselves by building political machines fueled by patronage, corporate interests, and regional loyalties. One of the key shifts that locked third parties out was the adoption of winner-takes-all electoral systems in nearly every state, which made it incredibly difficult for any party outside the dominant two to gain traction. Instead of proportional representation or coalition governments, which we see in other democracies, our system effectively erased minority voices. Even if a third party could muster significant support, they would still struggle to win any electoral votes under this system. How can a third-party candidate gather 270 electoral votes when the most we've ever seen in a post-Civil War election was from the segregationist George Wallace, who put those regional loyalties to the test? In 1968, he ran on the American Independent Party ticket and gained 48 electoral votes, all located across 5 southern states. No other third-party candidate has even come close to that number post-Civil War, and 48 is a far cry from the 270 electoral votes required to win. Additionally, ballot access laws became stricter since then, and the two major parties developed complex fundraising networks, leaving third parties unable to compete financially. Not only that, but the political establishment will play games with a third-party candidates filing paperwork and create arbitrary reasons to deny candidates access to the ballot at the state level. The Republican National Committee and Democratic National Committee will also use partisan judges to make indictments against an independent, or will just file frivolous lawsuits against the independent's campaign. So today, the legacy of the Whigs, once a viable third-party option, seems like a distant memory in a system now built to silence revolutionary voices. But if you pay close attention, we can reclaim our democracy by using the same structures that lock us into a two-party duopoly against itself. The structural remnants of slavery and the compromises made to preserve it still echo in the way the Electoral College functions today. In the 21st century, it still operates to maintain the status quo. 1824, 1876, 1888, 2000s, and 2016 were all elections where the candidate who won the popular vote didn't become president. 2016 is not ancient history. And I'm old enough to remember the 2000 election. What happened in those Florida courts was not democracy, it was nepotism. The will of the people was subverted more than once by a system designed centuries ago to protect elite interests, more specifically the slave-holding elite interests. We are still paying the price for this system today as it undermines the power of our citizens' votes, especially those of the working class. Even though we no longer live in the era of open slavery, its legacy of racial and economic oppression continues in different forms. The last independent who was on the ballot in a majority of states was John Anderson in 1980. Republican and Democratic Party state legislatures reacted to that by tightening laws to make it more difficult for independents to run. Ross Perot was able to get around that by joining minor parties and forming his own party, so Democrats and Republicans passed laws to make it even harder for alternative party candidates to get on ballots and to greatly restrict independent campaign funding. Now you have 50 states with 50 different filing deadlines and different combinations of what is considered a valid signature, what length of time is allowed to collect signatures, who is allowed to collect signatures, and so forth. Meanwhile, the pre-selected Republican and Democratic Party candidates get on the ballot automatically if they are chosen at the convention. The Republican and Democratic parties make all the election laws, control all of the judges, make sure all election officials are members of either one party or the other, determine who is allowed to run for office. And when we look back, history reveals why they have taken so many steps to prevent a true independent from winning the election. The mere presence of a viable third choice forces the establishment to be held accountable. The system resists change, but change and accountability is precisely what we need. In order to initiate real positive change, you must take action. When you vote for a third party, you are standing up not just against the two-party monopoly, but against the long history of racial, economic, and political oppression embedded in the very architecture of this nation's electoral process. That's the hard truth we must face if we are serious about dismantling corruption and building a legitimate democracy for all people. This is the American history that they don't want to talk about, the historical details that they are actively removing from schools, but it's the history we must confront if we are to move forward as an intelligent and equitable society. Now, if we're talking about reasons why voting for a third-party candidate is better than staying home or not voting, we have to mention voter fraud. Voter fraud schemes are weaponized to undermine the integrity of our elections. By concentrating the race into a handful of states, the Electoral College makes it easier for these major parties to manipulate, target specific regions, and distort outcomes. So if you want to make it harder for them to manipulate the system, then cast your vote for a third-party candidate. It is harder to hide nefarious voting activity in areas where the voter turnout is very high, and when it becomes too high, that triggers suspicion. When you say no to both sides of this coin by voting for neither major party within the system, your vote becomes a form of protest, a voice of dissent that can't be co-opted by the political machine. Your vote will be harder to silence because it is still counted. It will stand as a testament to your refusal to be complicit in a system that marginalizes the people of conscience. When you cast your vote for an independent candidate, you are making a statement to the global community. You are rejecting the illusion of choice between two corporate-backed parties that serve Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, and the oligarchic powers that run this country. You are standing for something bigger, a people's movement. Voting for a third-party candidate is the most direct path to a new political paradigm. I want you to understand how difficult it is for an independent to win and focus on why it has been made so difficult so we can redirect that unfair mechanism back onto the establishment and use it to apply pressure on the issues. There's no need to get caught up in debating over a particular flaw of any third-party candidate because they can't win. The system has already removed your ability to elect an independent president. Transform that knowledge into an opportunity to vote for an issue rather than a person, because the important issues still have a chance to win. And when you back that issue with your vote, you create a new voting bloc that now has leverage. The Green New Deal is evidence of this concept becoming reality as it was first platformed in the U.S. by Howie Hawkins of the Green Party when he ran for governor of New York in 2010. Fast forward to the 116th United States Congress in 2019, and Democrats attempted to get the Green New Deal passed. In 2020, the European Green Deal was supported by the European Council. Exercising this method of strategic nonviolent protest is certainly voting for the good of the people instead of the evil puppet on the left or right. Another example would be the Working Families Party, founded in 1998. Operating as a Democratic party within the party, the organization has endorsed Republican candidates through electoral fusion laws, allowing that candidate to receive votes on multiple party lines in the same election. When we combine the concepts and strategies of these two independent parties, we create a lane for the issues to get attention from the global stage, while simultaneously giving the major parties an opportunity to earn those votes. It should also be noted that this strategy doesn't typically siphon votes from the major parties in the ways that detractors would like you to believe. 40% of U.S. citizens don't vote at all. 62% of those who do vote, third party, either libertarian or green, say they would never ever vote for Democrats or Republicans. Gallup polling shows the two parties are doing such a bad job of serving public interest that 63% of all voters say we need another major party option and that the Electoral College should be eliminated. If those citizens collectively voted on a single third-party issue, it would absolutely sway elections by creating an environment of true competition. Accountability will be required to secure a victory on Election Day. See, that's exactly what they are afraid of and why they've put so many mechanisms in place to prevent it. Take a moment to imagine a future where these voters use their power to vote for an independent political party that carries the title of the issue being addressed. For example, the Abolish the Electoral College Party or the People's Party for runoff voting. This is how we leverage the existing system to become a platform for the issues that the voters decide need attention. At the very least, when you put your vote behind one of those issues, one of the two major parties will eventually take on that issue in order to claim those votes, since that new voting block will have a recorded, tangible number attached to it. If we're lucky, it will inspire more independent candidates to run in local and state level elections where they have a much better chance to win and will have a better opportunity than the major parties to earn those votes for themselves. The Electoral College is an institution designed and fortified to protect the political elite, and we must challenge it. We must show them that the people are not as divided as they want us to believe. We must show the world that unity does not mean being bullied into the same two pre-selected options. The more you vote for independence, the harder it becomes for the major parties to ignore us. When you stay home, you give the establishment an excuse to ignore your issues. And when you don't vote at all, you make it easier for them to rig the system. The poetic justice of using this method of protest voting is that we are using the system to empower the people by way of its own designed unfairness. You don't ever have to worry about voting the wrong third-party candidate into power, because the system already prevents that, and you can't possibly be wasting your vote if you hadn't planned on voting anyway. This is why today, when you cast your vote, especially if you are considering voting for a third-party candidate, you must recognize that we have the power to vote with conviction. And by doing so, we challenge the very forces that benefit from this questionable voting system. We must keep alive a legacy of truth-telling and justice-seeking. The most important thing is to live a life of integrity and honesty so that young people and older folk for generations to come will be able to say that we did hold on and attempt to preserve the truth. We chose to stand on the right side of history. So my brothers and sisters, if you want a real revolution, if you want to shake the very foundations of this country, then do not be afraid to vote for good to triumph over evil. The Electoral College was not built for us, but our resistance, our courage, our conviction can make our voices heard even in the face of overwhelming odds. See, my role here is to reintroduce humanity to the very best version of itself, help crash the system peacefully by simply telling the truth about history. Vote for a third party knowing full well they won't win the election. Not because it's easy, but because the best candidates are the ones who aren't allowed to win. And remember, I can only show you the door. You are the one who has to walk through it.